Have you ever been judged before you even had the chance to speak? Imagine standing at the foot of a private jet, holding every piece of proof you belong there, only to be told your skin makes you suspicious. That's what happened to two young sisters who thought they were simply flying to surprise their father. But in 6 unbearable hours, they faced a world that saw their color before their character, until one phone call changed everything. What if that phone call was yours? What if the man on the other end wasn't just their father, but the very person who owned the entire airline? Would you forgive? Would you fight? Or would you finally show them what true power looks like when it refuses to shout? This isn't just a story about racism. It's a story about dignity, courage, and the moment the world learns what justice really sounds like. So, stay with us, because by the end, you'll remember what it means to be seen, respected, and free. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us the fight for equality begins in the heart. The morning sun shimmered over Dallas, Texas, spilling gold across the manicured lawns of Everton Haven Resort. It was the kind of place where luxury whispered instead of shouted valet attendants in crisp uniforms, the faint scent of lavender and money drifting through the air. A sleek white Tesla rolled to a stop at the security gate. Behind the wheel sat Dr. Elijah Carter, a man whose calm presence carried quiet authority. His teenage daughter, Maya, sat beside him, holding a small bouquet of lilies. They were heading to a private weekend getaway, one meant to honor her late mother's memory. It had been 3 years since Angela Carter passed away. The wound had never truly healed. This trip, Elijah hoped, would be something gentle, a pause in a world that rarely paused for anyone. The guard stepped forward, clipboard in hand. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his tone carried the sharpness of suspicion. "Good morning. Can I help you?" Elijah smiled politely, handing over the printed reservation. "Yes. Elijah Carter. 2 guests. We have a suite booked under my name." The guard glanced at the document once, twice, and then frowned. I'm not seeing this on our list, sir. Maybe check with public lodging instead. This gate is for private members only." Elijah's brows furrowed slightly, though his voice remained steady. There must be a mistake. The booking was confirmed 2 days ago. The guard's lips tightened. "Sir, I've seen this before. People copy old confirmations, try to sneak in for the experience. You understand, we've got to protect our guests." Maya leaned forward. "But we're guests too." Her voice was soft, confused. He ignored her. "Sir, I'll need to verify this before I can let you through." He walked away, tapping his radio, speaking in low tones. Inside the car, silence pressed heavy. Elijah took a breath, resting his hand gently on the steering wheel. "We'll give them a few minutes," he murmured. But Maya's eyes flickered toward the long line of expensive SUVs behind them. Each waved through without a word. Her voice trembled. They didn't stop anyone else. Elijah didn't answer. He just looked at the gate, the one that opened so easily for others, yet remained stubbornly closed before them. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. The guard finally returned with another man, tall, sharp suit, silver hair, arrogance polished to perfection. His name badge gleamed Richard Blake, resort director. He didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he gave the Tesla a slow, measuring look. "Mornin'," he said curtly. "What seems to be the issue here?" The guard handed him the papers. They claim to have a reservation. Sir, Richard skimmed the pages, then looked up, a faint smirk forming. Mr. Carter, this is a private resort. Membership is invitation only. Perhaps you meant the public beach down the road. Elijah stayed composed. I didn't make a mistake. Here's the confirmation email. He offered his phone. Richard didn't take it. He folded his arms. This is a luxury property. We have to be cautious. There have been questionable bookings lately. People using stolen cards, falsified documents. The unspoken words hung between them like thick smoke. People like you. Maya's cheeks flushed. Our card isn't stolen. My dad's Elijah's gentle hand stopped her. Maya. His voice was quiet but firm. He turned back to the director. I understand your caution, but I assure you everything here is legitimate. Could you please check your system? Richard sighed, feigning patience. Fine. He turned to the guard. Run it again, but if it doesn't show, escort them out. The guard hesitated. Sir, the email. Out. Richard snapped. Elijah looked down, exhaling through his nose not out of weakness, but restraint. Years in the Air Force had taught him composure under fire. Years in corporate boardrooms had taught him something harder, that power could be both weapon and disguise. He looked at his daughter, whose eyes were wet but defiant. Stay calm, sweetheart. Some doors only open when people are ready to see who's knocking. The guard returned a few minutes later, voice low. Sir, the system does show a booking. It was prepaid, under Dr. Elijah Carter. Richard blinked just once, then forced a laugh. Well, that's odd. Still, I'll need secondary verification. Do you have proof of identity and corporate authorization? Elijah handed over his ID, corporate card, and booking code. Richard took them, turned on his heel, and walked away without another word. A few wealthy guests passed by on foot, glancing curiously at the unmoving Tesla. One whispered just loud enough for Maya to hear, "People will do anything for attention these days." Maya looked down, clutching the bouquet tighter. Elijah reached over, his hand steady. "You're doing fine, baby. Don't let them shrink you." The director returned with 2 security guards in tow. "I'm sorry," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "We can't confirm the authenticity of this transaction. You'll need to leave the premises." Elijah's jaw tensed. On what grounds? Richard's smile sharpened. On the grounds that we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone whose presence raises concern. It was the most polite form of humiliation and perhaps the cruelest. Elijah nodded slowly. I see. Thank you for clarifying. He started the car. As the Tesla turned away from the gate, Maya's voice cracked. They looked at us like we didn't belong. Dad, like we were pretending to be something we're not. Elijah's eyes stayed on the road. We don't need to pretend, Maya. We just need to remember who we are and let time remind them. In the rearview mirror, the resort's grand archway shimmered in the sun, still open for others and firmly shut behind them, far away. A storm cloud began to build both in the Texas sky and in the quiet heart of a man who had just been told he wasn't enough. But storms, like truth, have a way of coming back stronger. The sun had climbed high by the time the Tesla turned back onto the highway. Inside the car, silence settled between Elijah and Maya, heavy but fragile, like glass that might break if either of them spoke too loudly. Maya stared out the window, watching the world blur past fields of yellow wildflowers, distant power lines, an old man walking his dog. Everything outside seemed normal, yet inside her chest, something had shifted. They treated us like criminals. "Dad," she finally said, her voice trembling. "You showed them everything, the receipt, the ID, and they still looked at us like we didn't belong." Elijah kept his eyes on the road. People see what they're trained to see. Maya, not what's true. He exhaled slowly, the pain in his voice quiet but real. It's not the first time, and sadly, it may not be the last. Maya clenched her fists. "You didn't even get angry." He smiled faintly, a sad kind of wisdom behind his eyes. Anger is a fire that burns twice. It hurts you before it hurts them. Calm, on the other hand, is like water. It reshapes the stone without breaking. They drove in silence again. A billboard passed by Everton Haven, where excellence meets elegance. Maya muttered, "Maybe they should add excellence, if you're white enough." Elijah didn't correct her. He only said, "Let's find lunch. Something quiet." They pulled into a roadside diner a few miles down the kind that smelled like coffee and old country music. The waitress, a cheerful woman with gray streaks in her hair, smiled warmly. "Table for two." "You folks visiting?" Maya's shoulders dropped a little. "Yes, ma'am. Just passing through." The woman nodded and led them to a booth by the window. The contrast was striking hospitality without judgment. Elijah thanked her, then looked at Maya. "See, the world isn't all the same. You'll meet people who see you before they see your skin." Maya tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just wish it didn't have to be this hard." Outside. Thunder grumbled in the far distance, faint. But there, back at the resort, Richard Blake was pacing his office. The video footage from the gate had been uploaded by a bystander. A few hours later, it appeared on TikTok under the caption, "Black father and daughter denied entry to private resort despite confirmed booking." The comments exploded. Disgusting. Still happening in 2025, boycott Everton Haven. Richard's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He barked into it. Who filmed that? Find out. And tell PR to spin it, say it was a misunderstanding. In the staff lounge. Clara Nguyen scrolled through her phone. She saw the clip, the security guard's nervous stance. Elijah's calm composure. Maya's eyes brimming with disbelief. Clara's chest tightened. She had been there, standing behind the reception desk, pretending not to notice. She locked her phone, guilt rising like a tide. Later that afternoon, she knocked softly on Richard's door. "Sir, I just wanted to say, maybe we should reach out to them. Apologize." Richard shot her a glare. "Apologize? For what? For following policy. You think I'll kneel to internet outrage?" Clara hesitated. It looked bad. "Sir?" He cut her off. "Then maybe you should learn who signs your paycheck before you start giving moral lessons." She left quietly, her stomach turning. Meanwhile, back in the car, Elijah's phone buzzed. His assistant from D.C., Thomas Reed, had sent a message. "Dr. Carter, there's been chatter online, something about a resort in Dallas. Do you want me to address it?" Elijah read it twice, then typed back, "No, not yet." Maya looked at him curiously. "People are talking about it already." He nodded. "The internet doesn't miss much." "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked out the windshield. The clouds had darkened, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. "Sometimes," he said, "you let the storm form before you step into it. It shows you who stands where." That evening, they reached home. The air smelled like wet asphalt. Maya disappeared into her room, exhausted. Elijah walked into his study, a quiet space filled with framed photos, medals, and shelves lined with medical journals. He sat down, opened his laptop, and pulled up his company's investor portal. There was a bold headline: Everton Holdings partnered with Neuralink Diagnostics for upcoming wellness expansion. He stared at the screen for a long time. His own signature sat beneath the contract signed 2 weeks ago. So this was the same company, the same man, the same resort that had looked him in the eye and said, "You don't belong." Elijah closed the laptop softly. No anger, just quiet certainty. The rain outside turned heavier, tapping rhythmically on the window. He whispered to himself, "All right, then. Let's see how deep this lesson needs to go." Down the hallway, Maya peeked in. "Dad," he turned. "Yes, sweetheart, I was thinking. Mom always said people show who they are when they think no one's watching." He nodded. She was right, and I think the world's watching now. She hesitated. "You're not going to let them get away with it, are you?" Elijah's eyes softened. "No, Maya, but what matters isn't revenge. It's what we make of the truth." The thunder outside grew louder, rolling like drums announcing something inevitable. At the same time, across town, Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone again. Her conscience wouldn't let her rest. She whispered into the quiet apartment, "Someone has to say something." She opened her laptop and began to type an anonymous email to the corporate hotline detailing what she'd witnessed at the gate. Her fingers hovered over the send button. Fear coiled in her stomach. Then she thought of Maya's face, hurt but dignified. She hit send. The message would travel farther than she could imagine. By morning, Elijah would receive a copy of that same email forwarded directly to his private inbox through a chain of corporate compliance reports. And when he read it, he would know this wasn't about one bad guard or one arrogant man. It was about a system built to protect pride instead of people. He leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Thank you, whoever you are." Outside, the rain finally stopped. The sky cleared to a deep indigo. It was the calm before a reckoning. The next morning broke quiet and gray. The rain had washed the streets clean, but inside Elijah's home office, the air felt heavy. The screen before him glowed with the forwarded email from the anonymous source. It described, in painful detail, how the resort management had intentionally delayed, humiliated, and dismissed him and Maya at the gate. Each sentence was careful, factual, yet every word carried the weight of conscience. They knew who he was after seeing his name. The message read, the director said, "Not every doctor with a fancy car is who he claims to be." Staff were told not to escalate. "I'm sorry, I couldn't stay silent." Elijah leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. The truth wasn't surprising. What surprised him was that someone inside had chosen courage over silence. He replied briefly, "Thank you for your honesty. You did the right thing." Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the house. Maya was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. "Dad," she said, "your name's trending." He came over, reading the screen. Hashtags flooded the feed: Wire Carter incident, let them in, Everton exposed. News outlets had picked it up overnight. The clip now had over 5 million views. "I didn't post anything," she said quickly. People started sharing it." Elijah smiled faintly. The truth doesn't need help to travel. Maya, it finds its own way. Her voice wavered. Aren't you mad? They're using our faces everywhere. He sipped his coffee. I'm not mad, but I'm paying attention. Across town, at Everton Haven, Richard Blake sat in a crisis meeting with his staff. The corporate PR manager from headquarters had joined via video call, her tone clipped and cold. This has gone beyond a local issue. Richard, we're being accused of racial profiling. You said this was handled. Richard clenched his jaw. It was handled. The man showed up unannounced with some questionable paperwork. I followed procedure. The PR manager sighed. That man, as of this morning, is Dr. Elijah Carter, the CEO of a billion-dollar biotech firm. He's not just some man, he's one of our investors. The room fell silent. Richard blinked, color draining from his face. That can't be right. He didn't say anything about that. The woman on screen narrowed her eyes. You didn't give him the chance. The line went dead. Outside the office. Clara stood near the staff elevator, overhearing fragments of the conversation. Her heart pounded. She knew what was coming: meetings, investigations, maybe even layoffs. She wondered if her email would be discovered, if speaking the truth would cost her everything. Back in Washington, Elijah spent the afternoon reviewing corporate agreements. His assistant, Thomas Reed, entered the office with a thick folder. We've got the full financial tie-in between Neuralink and Everton Holdings, Thomas said. Your company owns 20% of that resort's expansion plan. Technically, you're one of their top-tier stakeholders. Elijah nodded. So, I can request a board review? More than that, Thomas added. You can call for an internal ethics audit. It would trigger a public disclosure. Elijah rubbed his temples. That's not what I want. Not yet. I want them to face what they did not because of who I am, but because of what they represent. Thomas hesitated. Sir, the media's already spinning this as a race scandal. Every outlet's calling for a statement. Elijah thought for a moment, then shook his head. No statement. Not until I see them face to face. That night, he called Maya into his study. I need your help, he said softly. Do you still have that video, the one everyone's sharing? She nodded, pulling it up on her phone. He watched it again. Frame by frame, the guard's stiffness. Richard's dismissive tone, Maya's frightened glance. He paused at the moment where the camera caught his face still calm, still patient. He whispered, almost to himself. Sometimes dignity is the loudest protest. Maya frowned. What are you going to do? Go back, he said, but not as their guest. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her small apartment, restless. The social media storm had exploded beyond her imagination. She had thought the story would fade, but it had turned into a movement. People were calling for accountability, boycotts, legal action. Her phone rang, a private number. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Nguyen. The voice was calm, male, deliberate. This is Dr. Elijah Carter. Her breath caught. Sir, I didn't mean to. I just thought people should know. I know, Elijah said gently, and I'm grateful. You did the right thing. There was a pause, long enough for her to gather courage. They're planning to cover it up. Mr. Blake said he'd handle the narrative. Elijah's tone remained even. Thank you. You've given me what I needed. When the call ended, Clara sank into her chair, trembling. It felt both terrifying and freeing to have finally spoken to him, the man who had been wronged, yet sounded like peace itself. The next morning, the world woke up to a headline across multiple outlets. Prominent CEO racially profiled at his own investment property. Commentators debated it endlessly on talk shows, podcasts, social feeds. Some defended the resort, others condemned it fiercely. But amid all the noise, one question echoed, "What will Dr. Carter do now?" At 10 that morning, an unmarked black sedan rolled quietly toward Everton Haven. The same gate guard looked up as it approached, his face tightening in recognition. The window lowered halfway. Elijah sat inside, composed as ever. "Morning," he said calmly. "You remember me?" The guard swallowed hard. Yes, sir." "Good. Then you'll understand when I tell you don't stop me this time." The gate opened without a word. As he drove through the winding path lined with magnolia trees, Elijah could feel the tension in the air, thick and uneasy. The storm he had let form was now directly above them. He parked near the main lobby. Guests whispered as he passed. Every camera phone turned. Every eye followed. Inside, Richard Blake stood frozen at the front desk, pretending to review paperwork. Elijah approached, his voice calm, his presence commanding. "Mr. Blake," he said softly, "it seems we have unfinished business." The director looked up, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Carter, I was just about to reach out. This has all been a misunderstanding." Elijah's gaze held steady. "Yes, and misunderstandings have consequences." The lobby fell silent. Staff stopped moving. Even the fountain seemed to hush. Richard opened his mouth, but Elijah continued. "You judged me before knowing who I was. You closed a door that my company helped build. Tell me, Mr. Blake, how does it feel to realize you locked out the very person who pays for your paycheck?" Richard's face drained a color. I didn't mean." "You did," Elijah interrupted, his voice still level. "And now, you'll mean every apology you make." From behind the counter, Clara appeared, her eyes wide but steady. Their gazes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement. Elijah turned slightly, speaking not just to Blake, but to everyone within earshot. "This is not just about me. It's about every person you've judged by skin, by accent, by something that had nothing to do with worth. This place calls itself a haven. Maybe it's time it learns what that word means." He didn't raise his voice, yet it filled the room like a quiet storm. Outside, thunder rolled again across the Texas sky. The marble floor of Everton Haven's grand lobby reflected the morning light like a mirror. But beneath its elegance, tension coiled tight. Dr. Elijah Carter stood at the center of that reflection, calm as a man who had nothing left to prove, yet every eye in the room knew the opposite was true. Richard Blake swallowed hard, the edges of his practiced composure unraveling. "Dr. Carter," he began, "please allow me to explain. This wasn't personal. Procedures were followed." Elijah tilted his head slightly. "Procedures," he repeated, his voice soft but cutting. "Tell me, Richard, which procedure states that suspicion comes before service? Which policy says dignity must be earned before it's given?" The director's throat tightened. He glanced at the employees nearby, their gazes fixed on him like witnesses to an execution. I was only ensuring the safety of our members," he stammered. "You have to understand." "People misuse," Elijah interrupted quietly. "People are people who look like me." Silence spread through the lobby like ripples in still water. The staff froze. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. From behind the reception desk, Clara watched every word, her heart hammering. She had never seen authority held with such grace and never seen arrogance stripped so completely by truth. Elijah's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He ignored it. His attention remained fixed on the man before him. "You turned away a father and his child on Thanksgiving week," he said. "You humiliated them without cause. Tell me, what did that accomplish for you?" Richard's lips trembled, searching for words that refused to come. It wasn't intentional. Elijah leaned in slightly, his tone still calm. Prejudice rarely is. A murmur swept through the lobby. A journalist who'd been waiting outside for updates slipped in, camera ready. The world had arrived to witness this reckoning. Elijah finally stepped back. "I'm not here to argue. I came to make things right, not just for me, but for the people who will walk through this door after me." He turned toward the reception counter. "Clara Nguyen," he said softly, "you're the one who sent the email." Her breath caught. "Sir, you spoke up when others stayed silent," he continued. "You reminded this place that conscience still exists. Don't ever apologize for that." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I just couldn't sleep, knowing what they did to you and your daughter." Elijah nodded. "That's how change begins. One sleepless night at a time." He looked back at Richard. "Mr. Blake, I'll be holding a meeting here tomorrow with your corporate board, not as a guest, but as a partner. I expect you to be present. Until then, this resort will suspend guest operations." Richard blinked. You can't do that." Elijah finally smiled small, controlled, devastated. "Richard, I don't need to ask permission to fix what I own." The lobby erupted in whispers. The director staggered slightly, color draining from his face as realization settled in. Elijah turned and began to leave, his polished shoes echoing softly on the marble floor. At the doorway, he paused and looked back once more. "You'll have your chance to speak tomorrow," he said. "I suggest you use it wisely." Outside, a cluster of reporters waited. Microphones lifted, questions flew. "Dr. Carter, do you plan legal action? Is Everton Haven being shut down permanently? Do you consider this a case of racial discrimination?" He raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "I consider this an opportunity," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "An opportunity for people in power to learn that true excellence begins with equality. I don't need retribution. I need reform." The statement rippled through the media like wildfire. By evening, clips of his calm declaration had gone viral. People called him the Quiet Storm, the man who dismantled discrimination without raising his voice. At home, Maya watched the coverage from the couch, her phone lighting up with notifications. "Dad," she said softly when he walked in, "they're calling you a hero." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Heroes fight battles. I just pointed at the truth and let it speak for itself." Maya looked up at him. "It's more than that, though. You didn't just prove them wrong, you made them listen." Elijah sat beside her. Sometimes silence can scream louder than shouting, and sometimes calm is the only thing that scares arrogance. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the television. Then Maya asked, "What will happen to that man?" "He'll face accountability." Elijah said simply, "But I hope he faces understanding, too. Change doesn't start with punishment, it starts with realization." Meanwhile, at the resort, Richard sat alone in his darkened office. The walls that once symbolized prestige now felt like a cage. His phone vibrated nonstop, calls from corporate, from the board, from journalists. He ignored them all. On his desk sat a printed headline, CEO shuts down, partner resort over racial profiling allegations. He ran a hand through his hair, whispering to himself, "How did I let this happen?" He replayed the moment at the gate, his voice, his arrogance, the dismissive tone. He had seen the certainty in Elijah's eyes that day. It wasn't anger, it was knowing. The realization burned deeper than any public shame. He poured a glass of whiskey and stared out the window at the manicured golf course beyond the glass. For the first time in his career, he didn't see wealth or success. He saw emptiness and empire built on polished cruelty. The next morning, the resort's board members began to arrive. Black cars lined the parking lot. Men and women in tailored suits stepping out with carefully neutral expressions. Inside the conference hall, Clara moved nervously between seats, setting up water glasses and notepads. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Elijah entered last. The air seemed to shift when he did. Calm authority radiated from him like quiet thunder. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Let's begin." As the room fell silent, every eye turned toward the man who had been denied entry 48 hours earlier, now seated at the head of the table. Richard Blake sat opposite him, pale and sleepless. Elijah didn't look at him yet. He opened a folder, spread out the resort's policy documents, and spoke clearly. Today isn't about retribution. It's about accountability. This incident didn't begin at a gate. It began with a culture, a pattern that tells people their worth depends on perception. We're here to end that pattern. The board members exchanged wary glances. One cleared her throat. "Dr. Carter, with respect, we're already addressing this internally." Elijah said softly but firmly, "You're addressing damage control. I'm talking about reform." He tapped the documents. "You want to protect this brand, then start by protecting people. Rewrite your policies, retrain your staff, build a code of dignity that applies to everyone, not just your paying elite." The words struck like measured lightning, no fury, just truth. For the first time, Richard Blake spoke. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I failed. I let bias masquerade as policy, and I'm sorry." The room held its breath. It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. Elijah nodded once. "Then let's make that apology mean something." The air inside the Everton Haven boardroom felt thick, like the weight of the world had been sealed behind those glass doors. Every executive sat stiffly, their pens untouched, their water glasses untouched, their eyes flicking between the polished conference table and the man at its head, Dr. Elijah Carter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was heavier than thunder. "Before we begin," Elijah said, folding his hands, "I'd like everyone to remember one thing. The incident at your gate isn't an isolated mistake. It's the reflection of a mindset, one that thrives in silence." He let the words sink in. Around the table, heads turned slightly, guilt and discomfort shifting through the room like a current. A board member, an older woman with pearl earrings, cleared her throat. "Dr. Carter, if I may, we value diversity. What happened to you was unfortunate." But perhaps unfortunate, he interrupted gently. Unfortunate is spilling coffee on a contract. What happened here was intentional neglect. Her lips pressed into a thin line. No one else dared to speak. At the far end of the room, Richard Blake sat motionless, a man unraveling quietly. Every polished piece of pride he had built through years of management had begun to crumble under the quiet scrutiny of the man across from him. Elijah continued, "I'm not interested in apologies that end in press releases. I'm here for change that begins with accountability." He stood and walked slowly to the whiteboard at the front. With deliberate strokes, he wrote 4 words: bias, policy, culture, consequence. "These," he said, turning back to them, "are your blind spots. Fix them, and you won't just save a brand, you'll save your humanity." The silence deepened. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. From the corner, Clara Nguyen raised a tentative hand. "Dr. Carter," she said softly, "if I may speak." Elijah nodded. "Please." She took a breath. "I've worked here for 6 years. I've seen how guests are treated based on assumptions where they came from, how they look, how they speak. Sometimes the staff aren't even aware they're doing it. It's built into the system." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "If this is going to change, it has to start with education, not just new rules." Elijah's eyes softened. "Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. That's exactly right." He turned back to the board. "You don't solve systemic arrogance with slogans. You dismantle it with awareness and courage." Richard shifted in his seat, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "And where do I stand in this, Dr. Carter? Because right now, I feel like the villain in a story I didn't mean to write." Elijah studied him for a long moment, then rewrite it. He said simply, "Start by owning your part." Richard exhaled shakily. "I was raised to believe professionalism meant protecting the company at all costs. But I see now that all I protected was my own comfort." He turned toward Clara. "I owe you an apology. 2. You did what I didn't have the courage to do." Clara nodded, her expression both wary and kind. "It's not too late to start doing what's right." Elijah watched them quietly, then said, "Change never starts from perfection. It starts from recognition. Today, this company decides which one it values more, image or integrity." At that moment, Elijah's assistant, Thomas Reed, entered the room carrying a thin stack of documents. "Dr. Carter," he said, setting them down. "These are the media inquiries and the board's public statement drafts, all waiting for your approval." Elijah didn't touch them. "They can wait," he said. The executives exchanged glances. One finally spoke, cautious. "Dr. Carter, with respect, the press expects a response by noon. Investors are panicking. Stock prices are already dropping." Elijah smiled faintly. "Then it's time they learn that the value of a company isn't measured in shares, but in character." He paused, then continued, his tone softer. "We're going to pause operations for 72 hours. During that time, we'll assemble a task force for diversity training, staff counseling, and guest equity standards. No more symbolic gestures, real implementation, real consequences." The woman with the pearl earrings frowned. "Do you realize how costly that will be?" Elijah's gaze turned sharp. "Do you realize how costly inaction already was?" No one answered. As the meeting drew to a close, the board members rose one by one, some in silent agreement, others in silent resentment. Elijah remained seated, reviewing the notes Clara had left him about internal misconduct reports she'd quietly documented over the years. When the room had nearly emptied, Richard lingered. "Dr. Carter," he said hesitantly, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to say, I've built my career on rules that never questioned why they existed. You've made me see how blind that was." Elijah looked up. Awareness is the first step. The second is what you do with it. Richard nodded slowly. "Then let me help fix what I broke." Elijah considered him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Start by telling the truth publicly." Richard's shoulders tensed, but he nodded again. "Tomorrow morning, the press conference. I'll speak." After Richard left, Clara approached quietly. "Do you really think he'll follow through?" Elijah smiled slightly. "The world has a way of forcing people to find their courage when the mirror finally shows them who they are." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Dr. Carter, for listening. Most people in your position wouldn't bother." He shook his head. "I didn't come here to win. I came here to heal something broken. Not just this place, something bigger." That evening, the resort was eerily still. Guests had been relocated. The grounds silent except for the whisper of wind through the magnolias. Elijah walked alone along the same cobblestone path where, just days earlier, he had been turned away. The air was cool now, clean after the storm. From a distance, he could hear the faint clatter of kitchen staff cleaning up, the muted hum of maintenance workers preparing for inspection. It felt like the calm breath between two waves, fragile, uncertain, yet necessary. He stopped near the gate that had closed against him. He reached out and ran his hand along the smooth metal, almost absently. "Funny," he murmured, "how walls can keep people out and truth in at the same time." Behind him, a voice spoke softly, "Dad." He turned to see Maya, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, worry etched into her expression. "You okay?" He smiled. "Better than I expected." She walked up beside him, looking at the gate. "Does it feel strange, standing here again?" He nodded. "A little, but it feels right, too. Sometimes the best way to close a wound is to return to where it began." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You always taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness, but how do you forgive people who didn't see you as human?" Elijah looked out toward the distant lights of the city. "By remembering that forgiveness isn't for them, Maya, it's for us. It's how we stay free." The words hung in the air simple, steady, powerful. A gust of wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and salt. Somewhere, a bell chimed, and though the resort still stood unchanged, something inside it, and inside everyone who had faced that room of reckoning, had begun to shift. The next morning dawned crisp and quiet over the manicured lawns of Everton Haven. The storm clouds that had gathered for days had finally lifted, revealing a pale blue sky. It should have been an ordinary morning. Instead, the resort felt like it was holding its breath. A podium had been set up in the main courtyard, facing a small cluster of journalists and cameras. Reporters murmured among themselves, waiting for the press conference that everyone knew would be watched across the country. Inside his suite, Dr. Elijah Carter stood before the mirror, buttoning his charcoal-gray jacket. His reflection was calm, but his eyes carried that still fire that people remembered, the fire of a man who had been tested and chosen grace over fury. From the doorway, Maya watched him silently. "You don't have to do this, Dad," she said softly. "You already proved your point." Elijah smiled faintly. "Proving a point doesn't fix a problem, sweetheart. It just exposes it. Today is about what comes after exposure." She hesitated. Do you trust him to tell the truth? He looked at her reflection behind him. I trust that truth has a way of finding its voice, even through the ones who once tried to silence it. Downstairs. Richard Blake sat in a small conference room, alone. His tie hung loose, hands clasped tightly together. The sleepless night showed on his face. He had replayed every second of the incident in his mind, his tone, his words, the way he had looked at Elijah and Maya as if they were imposters. The door opened quietly, and Clara Nayen stepped in. She carried a folder in her hands. "They're setting up outside," she said gently. "The press is waiting." Richard didn't look up. "You think I deserve what's coming?" Clara paused. "I think sometimes facing the truth hurts less than avoiding it." He finally lifted his gaze to her. "You were brave, Clara. I wasn't. I made a choice to look away when the right thing was staring me in the face." She nodded, setting the folder down before him. "Then make a different choice today. Outside." The murmur of cameras grew louder. Elijah arrived at the courtyard, greeted briefly by Thomas Reed, who handed him a list of prepared questions from the media. "Would you like me to handle the statements?" Sir Thomas asked. Elijah shook his head. "No, I'll speak from heart, not paper." At 10 o'clock sharp, the resort's gates closed to the public, the courtyard filled with staff, local reporters, and a few guests who refused to leave after the controversy. Among them stood families, employees, and people who had followed the story online, drawn by curiosity and something deeper. When Elijah stepped to the microphone, a hush fell. He didn't read from notes. His voice, steady and measured, carried across the courtyard. 3 days ago, he began, my daughter and I were denied entry to this resort. We were treated as less than, not because of anything we did, but because of who we are. I stand here not to relive that moment, but to make sure it never happens again, not to anyone. He looked out across the sea of faces. Everton Haven isn't just a place of leisure. It's a symbol of privilege, of status, of the stories we tell ourselves about worth. When that symbol fails to recognize humanity, it fails its purpose. There was a pause. Camera shutters clicked softly in the background. Elijah continued, "This isn't a witch hunt. I didn't come here to destroy reputations. I came to rebuild integrity, and that begins with honesty." He turned slightly toward the side of the stage, where Richard stood in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blake," Elijah said gently, "would you like to speak?" The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through the air. Richard hesitated, then stepped forward, his footsteps echoing against the stone path. When he reached the microphone, his voice trembled at first. "My name is Richard Blake," he said, "and I'm the director of Everton Haven. 3 days ago, I made a decision that will follow me for the rest of my life. I looked at a man and his daughter, and I didn't see them. I saw what my bias wanted me to see." He stopped, swallowing hard. "There's no policy that told me to do that, no company rule that forced me. It was me, my ignorance, my pride." The courtyard was silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Richard took a deep breath. "Dr. Carter showed me something I didn't expect, Grace. He could have humiliated me the way I humiliated him. He could have destroyed me with the same power I used against him. But he didn't. And that's why I'm standing here today to say I was wrong, and to take whatever comes next." A few reporters lowered their cameras. For a moment, the spectacle faded and something real took its place, a man confronting his own shadow. Elijah stepped forward and rested a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Accountability doesn't erase the past," he said quietly, "but it can redefine the future." He turned back to the crowd. "We've agreed that Everton Haven will establish the Angela Foundation Scholarship, named after my late wife, to support minority students in hospitality and healthcare, because the best way to honor pain is to turn it into purpose." Applause broke out, not the wild, performative kind, but a gentle, sincere wave of approval. Some staff wiped their eyes. Clara stood near the back, tears on her cheeks, though she was smiling through them. As the crowd dispersed, a young journalist approached Elijah. "Dr. Carter, what message do you want people to take from this?" He looked thoughtful. That humility is power, that decency is not weakness, and that no matter how far we climb, we should never forget what it feels like to be turned away. That night, clips from the conference flooded every major network. The internet called it the speech that changed everything, Elijah's calm, Richard's public apology, and the announcement of the foundation became a global headline about dignity and change. But while the world celebrated, Elijah sat alone on his balcony, the city lights flickering below. Maya joined him quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You changed everything." He smiled, eyes distant. "Change doesn't happen in a day, Maya. It begins here." He touched his chest, "and takes root here." He pointed to the horizon, where the faint glow of dawn was beginning to rise again. Maya leaned her head on his shoulder. "Mom would be proud." He closed his eyes, feeling the wind brush past his face. "I hope so, because all I did was listen to the voice she left behind." In the distance, the resort stood illuminated in quiet reflection, its gates no longer a barrier, but a symbol of awakening, and somewhere deep within, beneath all the noise and the headlines, the world itself seemed to take a small, collective breath of relief. Night had fallen soft over the resort, but the air still hummed with the aftershock of the day. Everton Haven was quiet, too quiet, like a theater after the curtain drops. Staff moved carefully through the halls, whispering to one another as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled after the storm. In his suite, Dr. Elijah Carter sat by the window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The moonlight caught the edge of his expression, calm, but thoughtful, like a man who had seen both victory and weight in the same day. From the adjoining room, Maya emerged, her hair damp from a shower. "You didn't eat dinner," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Didn't feel hungry." "You always say that when you're thinking too much." She teased gently, walking over to sit beside him. Elijah chuckled. "Maybe I'm guilty." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. But I'm also curious about what." He looked toward the dark horizon, about how deep the roots of arrogance go. What we saw at that gate wasn't just one man's mistake. It was a reflection of something larger, something I've seen my whole life. Maya frowned. "You think they'll really change?" Elijah hesitated. "They'll try, but trying isn't the same as transforming." A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Thomas Reed stepped in, holding a folder. "Sir, I thought you'd want to see this." He placed the folder on the table. Inside were printouts, screenshots of online articles, messages from employees, even leaked memos. One headline stood out in bold letters: Everton Haven's past scandals resurface amid Carter controversy. Maya's eyes widened. "What is this?" Thomas's expression was grave. Turns out this wasn't the first time. There have been multiple complaints over the years, racial profiling, selective cancellations, quiet settlements, all buried under NDAs. Elijah's jaw tightened, and the board knew most likely. I dug deeper. The cover-ups were signed off by someone at the top, Harold Whitmore, the chairman himself. For the first time that day, Elijah's composure faltered slightly. Harold Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir. The same Harold Whitmore who signed the partnership with Neuralink. The man who praised your company's ethics in every press release," Maya whispered. "He sounds like a hypocrite." Elijah sighed, standing and walking to the window again. "No," he said quietly. "He sounds like a man who forgot the cost of silence." There was a long pause before he turned back to Thomas. "Set up a meeting with him. Tomorrow, here, at the resort." Thomas nodded. "Already done. He arrives in the morning." After Thomas left, Maya looked up at her father. "You're not done yet, are you?" He smiled gently. "Justice doesn't end with applause. Maya, it ends when truth no longer needs defending." Meanwhile, across town, Harold Whitmore sat in his study surrounded by mahogany shelves and muted lamplight. The television played Elijah's speech on a loop. Harold's face was pale, the glass of scotch in his hand trembling slightly. His wife's voice came from the doorway. "You knew this would come out eventually, didn't you?" Harold didn't answer. He just turned off the TV and whispered, "He's not like the others." "Who?" she asked. "Elijah," he said. "He's different. He didn't attack. He didn't demand revenge. He asked for humanity, and that's exactly why his words cut deeper." The next morning arrived like a drumbeat of inevitability. The resort had been cleared for privacy. Only a handful of executives, Elijah, and the arriving chairman were allowed into the conference hall. When Harold Whitmore entered, the room fell silent. His presence commanded attention not from intimidation, but from age and power wrapped in composure. "Dr. Carter," he greeted, extending a hand. "It's been a long time." Elijah shook it firmly. "It has." They sat across from each other. The table between them might as well have been a battlefield. Elijah spoke first. "I read the reports. Harold, the settlements, the silenced complaints, the quiet firings of employees who dared to speak up. How much of it did you approve?" Harold's jaw flexed, enough to know it was wrong. Then, why Elijah's tone was steady but piercing. Why protect prejudice with paper? Harold exhaled slowly. "Because every time I tried to stop it, someone said, 'It's just business,' and I let them convince me that business mattered more than justice." Elijah nodded once. "And now," Harold said, "I see what it cost. Not just reputation, but integrity. I should have stood up years ago." Elijah studied him. "You still can." Harold looked up sharply. "What do you mean, make it public?" Elijah said. "All of it. The settlements, the complaints, the reforms. Let people see the truth before it's forced out." The older man hesitated. That would destroy the company. Elijah leaned forward. "No, Harold. It would free it." The two men held each other's gaze for a long, tense moment. Then Harold sat back, weary but resolute. "You've always been a better man than I am, Elijah." Elijah's eyes softened. "No, I've just been reminded more often of what it feels like to be invisible." By noon, A new press release went out, not a denial, not a deflection, but a confession. Everton Holdings publicly admitted to systemic failures, pledging transparency and reform. Harold Whitmore's statement ended with one line that would echo through the media for weeks. "We can't erase the gate that closed against Dr. Carter, but we can make sure no gate closes against anyone again." That evening, as news anchors dissected the unprecedented act of corporate honesty, Elijah walked along the edge of the resort's quiet beach. Maya walked beside him, the sand cool beneath their feet. "You did it again," she said softly. "You made them see." He chuckled. "No, Maya, I just held up the mirror. They chose whether to look. They reached the water's edge." The waves lapped gently, reflecting the fading sun in ripples of gold. Maya slipped her hand into his. "Do you ever get tired, Dad, of fighting this kind of battle?" Elijah smiled, eyes on the horizon. "I get tired of the pain, yes, but not of the purpose. The day I stop fighting for what's right is the day I stop deserving peace." Behind them, the resort lights flickered on one by one, casting soft halos across the beach. Somewhere deep inside its walls, people were rewriting policies, retraining minds, and perhaps rediscovering conscience. Elijah turned to Maya, his voice low but steady. "Change is like the tide. It takes time, but it never stops coming." She squeezed his hand. "And we'll be here to watch it." He smiled. "Yes, together." And as they stood there, father and daughter, under the evening sky, the world felt just a little bit more awake than it had the day before. By dawn, the resort was no longer just a destination. It had become a symbol. News vans lined the outer gates. Camera crews swarmed like moths around light, hoping to capture another moment of history in motion. But inside, Dr. Elijah Carter moved through the halls in silence. His suit was simple, his expression thoughtful. He paused at the framed photos along the corridor, images of luxury, smiling guests, and wealth. Not one of them showed a person who looked like him. Maya trailed beside him, her steps quiet. "They've turned this place into a circus," she whispered. "It's everywhere online. TV, TikTok. People are calling you a hero again." He gave a small, weary smile. "Heroes don't fix systems, Maya. People do. Ordinary people who decide they've had enough." They entered the breakfast lounge, which was nearly empty except for Clara Nguyen, who was reviewing staff training notes. She looked up as they approached, smiling faintly. "Morning, Dr. Carter, Maya." "Clara," Elijah greeted. "How are things?" "Tense," she admitted, but hopeful. "Some staff resigned last night. Others stayed and said they want to help rebuild. Maybe that's what real change looks like, what's left after fear walks out the door." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "You think they'll mean it?" Clara hesitated. "I think they're learning to." Before Elijah could respond, Thomas Reed appeared, carrying a tablet. His expression was tight. "Sir, we've got a situation. There's a journalist outside Samantha Hayes. She's not leaving until she gets an interview." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What does she want?" Thomas lowered his voice. "She says she has evidence that the discrimination at Everton Haven wasn't just negligence. She claims it was protected by corporate policy." Clara's head snapped up. "That can't be true. The policies I've seen were rewritten." Thomas finished grimly. "Before the press conference, she has the old ones, for the first time in days." Elijah looked genuinely unsettled. "Bring her in." Minutes later, Samantha Hayes entered a composed woman in a beige suit, holding a leather notebook and a quiet kind of confidence. Her eyes, sharp and curious, scanned the room before she spoke. "Dr. Carter," she began, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I know your time is limited. I always have time for the truth," Elijah said calmly. "What is it you've found?" Samantha opened her notebook. For 5 years, Everton Holdings has operated under an internal compliance directive labeled Guest Risk Index. It was designed to help staff flag potential security or payment issues, but in practice, it profiled guests based on race, surname, and spending habits. The data shows a pattern. Black guests were flagged 3 times more often than white guests. Maya's eyes widened. "You mean they had a system that ranked people?" "Yes," Samantha replied. "And what's worse, these flags were quietly sent to management before check-in. Richard Blake would have received them directly." Clara's face went pale. That explained so much. The delays, the constant second-guessing. Elijah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Why bring this to me?" Samantha met his gaze. "Because you're the only one who can expose it without being dismissed as emotional or self-serving. The public listens to you now." Thomas frowned. "Ms. Hayes, releasing that kind of information could destroy the remaining leadership. You'll burn any goodwill we've built in the last 48 hours. Elijah turned to him. "Maybe goodwill built on silence isn't worth keeping." He looked back at Samantha. "You're certain this is real?" She nodded, verified through multiple former employees. "I'll publish with or without your cooperation, but I'd rather you tell the story than let the narrative twist itself again." Elijah exhaled slowly. "Give me an hour." When she left the room, the silence was heavy. Maya broke it first. "Dad, what are you going to do?" He walked to the window, staring at the reflection of his daughter behind him. "The same thing I've always done. Speak plainly and let the truth stand on its own." Meanwhile, in a small office across the property, Richard Blake sat hunched over a laptop, his fingers shaking as he read the headline that was already circulating on smaller blogs: "Everton Haven's Guest Risk Policy Leaked Discrimination by Design." His phone buzzed, Harold Whitmore's name flashing on the screen. "Richard." Harold's voice came through, heavy. "Is it true?" "Yes," Richard whispered. "I didn't write the policy, but I didn't stop it either." Harold sighed. "Then you know what comes next. This time, we don't bury it." Later that afternoon, Elijah stood once again before the cameras. The crowd was smaller now, no longer curious onlookers, but people waiting for accountability. He began simply. "When I asked for transparency, I didn't expect what I'd find. It seems the bias at Everton Haven wasn't born of one bad decision. It was built into the foundation." Gasps rippled through the audience. Elijah continued, voice steady. "A system that hides behind policy is more dangerous than one that acts in ignorance, because it teaches people that prejudice can be professional." Behind him, Clara and Maya watched silently, their eyes glistening with pride and pain. Elijah's gaze swept across the reporters. "So here's my promise. Neuralink will no longer partner with any organization that operates without independent equity oversight. We will help fund and train teams to audit corporate systems for discrimination before another child grows up thinking their worth is a risk factor." The words landed like thunder. Samantha, standing at the back of the crowd, lowered her camera slightly. For the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking about headlines. She was thinking about hope. After the conference, she approached Elijah quietly. "You know, this will trigger lawsuits, resignations, investigations. Are you ready for that storm?" He smiled faintly. "Storms clear the air. Ms. Hayes, let it come." That night, the resort glowed under quiet rain. Maya stood on the balcony, watching lightning flash beyond the horizon. Elijah joined her, his expression calm. "They'll hate you for this, won't they?" she said softly. He smiled gently. "Some will, but others will find their courage because of it. And that's enough." She looked up at him, her eyes searching. "Do you ever get scared all the time?" he said with a quiet laugh. "But fear means you're standing at the edge of something that matters." As thunder rolled in the distance, Maya slipped her arm through his. Together they stood, father and daughter, watching the storm cleanse the night sky, proof that even the darkest clouds eventually give way to light. By the time morning sunlight spread across Dallas, the world had already changed. The leak from the global ledger had gone viral overnight. Screens everywhere flashed headlines: guest risk, index exposed, corporate racism and luxury hospitality. Dr. Elijah Carter calls for nationwide equity reform. The noise was relentless news panels, talk shows, podcasts. Everyone had an opinion. Some hailed Elijah as a visionary. Others accused him of destroying a centuries-old establishment. Inside Neuralink Diagnostics, his company headquarters, the atmosphere buzzed with activity. Employees moved briskly through glass corridors, phones ringing off the hook. The company had never seen such global attention. In his office, Elijah stood by the window overlooking the Dallas skyline. His reflection stared back, composed but tired. Thomas Reed entered quietly, tablet in hand. "Sir, the governor's office called again," Thomas said. "They're inviting you to testify at the upcoming hearing on corporate accountability. They're calling it the Carter Clause." Elijah turned slightly. "That's not a law yet. It could be," Thomas replied, "if you back it publicly." Elijah sighed, rubbing his temple. "If we make it about me, we lose the message. This isn't supposed to be the Carter movement. It's supposed to be a human one." Thomas nodded but didn't argue. "Still, sir, the hearing could set precedent. They'll listen to you." Before Elijah could respond, his phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed Richard Blake. He hesitated for a second before answering. "Richard, Dr. Carter," came the voice, quiet, weary, but determined. "They've opened the internal audit. It's worse than we thought. Those policies weren't just for this resort. They were part of a network across all Everton Holdings properties." Elijah's eyes narrowed. How many? 17 hotels, 3 private clubs, same algorithm, different names. For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of the truth pressed down like a physical force. "Do what you have to do," Elijah said finally. "This isn't about saving a company anymore. It's about saving conscience." After the call, Elijah turned to Thomas. "Prepare a statement, short, clear, something the world can't twist." Thomas began drafting while Elijah stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before him alive, chaotic, divided. Somewhere down below, protests had already begun. Signs waved with his name on them, some in support, some in anger. Behind him, a soft voice said, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" He turned. Samantha Hayes stood at the doorway, a press badge clipped to her jacket. "I guessed," Elijah said. "Didn't know it had happened this fast." She stepped closer. "People are calling this the beginning of a corporate civil rights movement. Others say you've declared war on the business world." He smiled faintly. "Truth tends to look like war to those who profit from the lie." Samantha studied him. "You realize this won't end with one company, right? Once the hearings start, they'll come after every brand tied to the system. The backlash could be enormous." "I'm counting on it," he said simply. A moment of silence passed between them. Then Samantha said, "I've been a journalist for 20 years. I've covered revolutions, whistleblowers, corruption scandals, but I've never seen someone stay so calm while the world burns around them." Elijah chuckled quietly. "It's not calm, it's conviction." Later that afternoon, Maya Carter waited in the lobby, earbuds in, scrolling through the flood of online debates. One comment caught her eye. "He's just playing the race card for fame." Typical. Her stomach tightened. Another read, "If more men like Dr. Carter led corporations, maybe we'd finally have progress. Conflicting voices, endless opinions." She turned off her phone, feeling the swirl of it all pressing against her chest. When Elijah came down, she looked up. "Do you ever wonder if people will ever agree on what's right?" He smiled gently. "Agreement isn't the goal, Maya. Awareness is. The world can't heal from wounds it refuses to see." As they left the building, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. "Dr. Carter, do you plan to run for office? Are you being funded by activist groups? Is it true you're launching a new initiative?" He paused, facing them calmly. "I'm not running for anything," he said. "I'm standing still so the truth has somewhere to land." That evening, Elijah met Harold Whitmore in a quiet corner of a private lounge. The older man looked smaller than before, the burden of exposure evident in his face. "I've lost everything, Elijah," Harold said softly. "Board seats, investors, credibility." Elijah shook his head. "You haven't lost everything. You've lost illusion. There's a difference." Harold looked down at his glass. "What do I do now?" "Tell the truth, publicly, without polish, without spin. The world doesn't need another apology. It needs honesty." Harold's eyes glistened. "And if they never forgive me," Elijah leaned back, "then at least they'll stop fearing what honesty costs. That's worth something." As the night deepened, a storm rolled in again, the kind that rattled windows and cleansed the air. Rain streaked the city lights as thunder echoed over Dallas. At home, Maya sat by the window, watching the downpour. Elijah joined her, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. She took one, smiling faintly. "It feels like the sky's crying for us." He looked out into the storm. Maybe it's not crying. Maybe it's washing away what doesn't belong. She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "You think people can really change?" "Dad," Elijah sipped his tea before answering. "Yes, but not all at once. Change happens like rain, slow, persistent, and often inconvenient." She smiled. "That sounds like you." He laughed softly. "Then I suppose I'm in good company." The rain fell harder. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, news crews chasing another headline, another wave in a story that had become a mirror for an entire nation. And yet, inside that quiet apartment, father and daughter sat in peace, 2 souls at the center of a storm, unshaken, waiting for the world to catch up to the truth they had already accepted, that justice was never about noise. It was about stillness, the kind that came when courage met conscience and refused to look away. The marble corridors of Capitol Hill gleamed under the morning lights, polished and cold, echoing with footsteps and whispers. Inside one of its grand committee rooms, preparations were underway, cameras were being set, microphones tested, and aides hurriedly briefed senators on the case that had divided the nation. At the center of it all sat a single placard, Dr. Elijah Carter, Neurolink Diagnostics, outside. Reporters gathered like a tide. Protesters filled the steps, some holding signs that read, "Justice is not a trend," while others shouted, "Stop weaponizing guilt." The world was watching, again. In a nearby waiting room, Elijah Carter adjusted his tie in silence. He looked calm, but inside, the storm churned. Thomas Reed paced the floor, reading over notes on his tablet. "They're expecting fireworks," Thomas muttered. "Half the committee wants you to be the face of reform. The other half wants to make you an example of overreach." Elijah glanced at him. "And what do you expect?" Thomas stopped pacing. "Honestly, I expect you to do what you always do, walk in, tell the truth, and make the rest of us look braver than we are." Elijah smiled faintly. "Then let's not disappoint them." Before he could stand, Samantha Hayes entered, her press badge clipped to her lapel. "Dr. Carter," she said, lowering her voice, "I wanted to warn you the opposition committee has obtained sealed documents from the Everton audit. They're planning to question your motives." Elijah's expression didn't waver. "Let them. The truth doesn't change because someone's afraid of it." Samantha hesitated, then asked softly, "Aren't you tired of being calm all the time?" He looked up at her, eyes steady. "Calm isn't the absence of pain. Ms. Hayes, it's the discipline to face it without letting it define you." Minutes later, the hearing began. The cameras flashed. The hum of whispers faded as the chairman struck the gavel. "This session of the United States Senate Committee on Corporate Ethics is now in order. Dr. Carter, you may begin your testimony." Elijah stood, adjusted his microphone, and spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come before you not as an executive, not as a victim, but as a father who wants his daughter to grow up in a country where dignity isn't something you have to earn twice." The room grew still. He continued, "When my daughter and I were turned away at that resort gate, it wasn't a unique event. It was a symptom. It wasn't one man's mistake. It was a mirror held up to a system that has learned to disguise discrimination as policy." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We've spent too long excusing bias as procedure and mistaking exclusion for order. The truth is, simple equity isn't charity, it's responsibility." Cameras zoomed in, senators leaned forward, then one of them, Senator Crandall, cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter, with all due respect, your case has already sparked a wave of unrest. Businesses fear this will turn into a witch hunt. What do you say to those who claim you're dividing the country?" Elijah met his gaze calmly. "I didn't divide the country, Senator. I revealed where it was already broken." A murmur rippled through the room. Crandall frowned. "And what gives you the right to decide which system should change?" Elijah smiled faintly. "The same right that gives any American the duty to speak when silence becomes complicity." In the corner, Maya Carter watched her father on a live feed from the waiting room. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd never seen him so composed, yet so fierce. Back in the hearing room, Elijah's words flowed like water over stone, measured, deliberate, unstoppable. "I'm not asking for punishment," he said. "I'm asking for progress. Not to tear down institutions, but to rebuild them on something stronger than tradition on truth." At that moment, a senator from the opposite aisle leaned into his microphone. "Dr. Carter, are you aware that your actions have cost Everton Holdings over 400 jobs?" Elijah's expression softened. "Yes, and I mourn every one of them. But let me ask you, Senator, how many opportunities were denied before those firings ever happened? How many doors closed quietly in the dark before one finally made the news?" The room fell silent again. Outside the chamber, reporters typed furiously. Inside, Samantha Hayes scribbled every word by hand, knowing she was witnessing something larger than politics. Elijah ended his statement simply. "I've been asked what I hope to achieve. The answer is this: I hope that someday my daughter won't have to testify for the same reason I am today." Applause began hesitantly, then grew. The chairman struck his gavel once more. "Order. The record will show that Dr. Carter's testimony will be entered into the official record of these proceedings." When the hearing adjourned, Elijah stepped out into the hallway, the cameras flashing like lightning. Maya ran toward him and hugged him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You made them listen." He smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. Listening is the first step. Acting is the second. Later that evening, Elijah returned to his hotel. Exhaustion pressed on him like gravity. As he loosened his tie, Thomas entered, holding a tablet. "Sir, I thought you should see this on the screen." An article headline glowed, "Dr. Carter's testimony sparks federal investigation into systemic bias in corporate America." Under it was a photo of Elijah at the hearing, his expression calm, eyes unwavering. Thomas grinned. "Looks like you've started a movement." Elijah chuckled softly. "Movements belong to the people. Thomas, I just lit the first candle." At that same moment, across town, Clara Nguyen was on a call with a coalition of civil rights lawyers, helping design new guidelines for inclusive hiring. Richard Blake, now working as a consultant, quietly sent over documents that would help their case. And, in her newsroom, Samantha Hayes finished typing her article. The title read, "The Man Who Spoke Softly and Moved a Nation." That night, as rain whispered against the city windows, Elijah stood by the glass, looking out at the shimmering lights of Washington, D.C. Maya joined him, barefoot, holding a cup of cocoa. "You think they'll change, Dad?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "They already have, Maya. They just don't know it yet." She leaned her head on his arm. "I'm proud of you." He looked down at her, his voice quiet. "Then my work was worth every fight." Outside, lightning flashed again, but this time it didn't feel like a storm. It felt like illumination, the kind that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. The morning after the hearing, the world no longer saw Dr. Elijah Carter as just a man. He had become a symbol. Some called him the Quiet Revolution. Others accused him of orchestrating chaos under the mask of civility. But Elijah, as always, ignored the noise. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing fairness. At Neuralink's D.C. office, the lobby was filled with flowers, letters, and news crews. Inside, Elijah sat in his corner office with the blinds half drawn, reading a stack of emails from CEOs, senators, and community leaders. Every message began the same way. "We'd like your insight on..." He leaned back, closing his eyes. The world suddenly wanted to listen, but few wanted to understand. Thomas Reed entered quietly, holding a folder. "Sir, the White House has requested a meeting. They want you on the Corporate Accountability Task Force." Elijah didn't open his eyes. And what will they ask in return? Thomas hesitated. They'll want to control the narrative, limit how deep you dig, make this look like partnership instead of reform. Elijah smiled faintly. They always do. Just then, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read Clara Nguyen. He picked up immediately. "Elijah," she began, voice urgent. "The federal investigators have found something new. There's a data trail Everton Holdings wasn't acting alone. At least 4 other corporations use the same profile and software." Elijah's tone sharpened. "Names." She exhaled. Everwell Bank, Horizon Airlines, and 2 private equity firms, all tied through offshore servers. They didn't just tolerate discrimination, they automated it. He was silent for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. "Send me everything." When the call ended, he turned to Thomas. "It's bigger than we thought. They didn't just write policies. They coded bias into machines." Thomas frowned. "So, what's the move?" Elijah stood, straightening his tie. "We go public again. But this time, we don't talk about one company. We talk about an industry." That evening, under the soft glow of New York's skyline, Elijah appeared on a live television broadcast. The studio was silent as he faced the camera, his tone even, deliberate. "Racism doesn't always wear a uniform or raise its voice," he said. "Sometimes it hides behind algorithms and spreadsheets. We call it efficiency. But what it really is evolution without empathy. Across the country, millions watched. In homes, offices, and cafes, people paused to listen. Technology should make us fairer." Elijah continued. "But if we teach machines our prejudice, we don't create progress, we create permanence." In the control room, the producer whispered to Samantha Hayes, who stood watching just off camera. "You got your moment," he said. "This is history." But Samantha didn't smile. She was watching the man, not the story. Elijah wasn't performing, he was pleading. After the broadcast, the backlash came fast. Corporate lobbyists denounced him. Stock markets wavered. Talk shows debated his motives. The hashtag Carter Reform trended for days. And through it all, Elijah remained silent. One night, Maya Carter found her father sitting alone on their apartment balcony, the city lights flickering like restless thoughts. "Dad," she said softly, handing him a mug of tea. "They're saying you're trying to bring down the economy." He smiled faintly. "They said the same thing about anyone who ever tried to bring up the truth." Maya sat beside him. "Do you ever wish you could just stop? Go back to before all this?" He looked out at the skyline. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I remember what it felt like when that gate closed on us. And I know stopping isn't an option." She nodded slowly. "I guess courage doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it just looks like not giving up." He smiled, proud. "Exactly." Meanwhile, Clara Nguyen had begun her new role as Director of Equity Reform for Everton Holdings. She spent long nights drafting policy, training teams, and giving interviews, but the work wasn't easy. In one meeting, a senior executive scoffed. "You can't fix bias with training slides." Clara looked him in the eye. "No, but I can start by reminding you that people aren't policies." Her words would later circulate online as a viral quote, printed on posters beside Elijah's face. Back in Washington, Richard Blake walked into a courthouse, clutching a folder of documents. His hair was grayer, his expression solemn. He handed the folder to a federal attorney. "These are internal memos from 2016 to 2020, he said quietly. "Emails, directives, everything. It proves they knew what they were doing." The attorney nodded. "Mr. Blake, you understand this could end your career completely." He hesitated, then said, "I ended my career the day I chose silence over conscience, that night." Samantha Hayes finished writing her next article, Redemption in Real Time, the Men and Women Following Dr. Carter's Call. But when she reread it, she paused. The piece wasn't about Elijah anymore, it was about the people around him who were learning to change. She deleted the first line and typed instead, "When one man chose to tell the truth, he gave others permission to do the same." Weeks later, as the Department of Justice prepared its official reforms, Elijah stood at a podium in a grand hall in New York City. It was a gathering of global business leaders, some skeptical, some humbled. He spoke plainly. Every system is built by human hands. That means it can be rebuilt. The question is whether we have the courage to admit it needs rebuilding. The room was silent. Even the skeptics listened. In the back row, Maya sat beside Clara and Thomas. They exchanged a look that said everything. This wasn't just a speech. It was a turning point. Elijah's closing words lingered in the air like a quiet prayer. "Justice isn't a destination," he said. "It's a direction. And if we keep walking toward it, even slowly, even stumbling, we're still moving forward." When he stepped down, applause filled the hall, not loud or explosive, but steady and sincere. Outside, as snow began to fall over the city, Elijah and Maya walked together through the quiet streets. The cold air felt clean, the world, at least for a moment, peaceful. "Dad," Maya whispered, "you think this is the end?" He smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. This is the beginning of something that won't need me to keep going." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Then maybe that's what victory really looks like." He nodded. "Maybe it is." And as they disappeared into the falling snow, the world behind them hummed with the faint sound of change, slow, imperfect, but unstoppable. The city was alive that night. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the streets glistening like mirrors, reflecting the golden lights of Manhattan. Inside the Roosevelt Hall, hundreds of people gathered, leaders, educators, reformers, and quiet everyday citizens whose lives had been touched by one man's resolve. The event was called the Angela Initiative Launch Gala, but to most, it felt less like a ceremony and more like a closing chapter in a long, hard story, one that had begun at a gate where two sisters were told they didn't belong. Backstage, Dr. Elijah Carter adjusted his cufflinks, taking a slow breath. He could hear the low hum of conversation from beyond the curtain, the applause, the anticipation, but his thoughts weren't on the crowd. They were on the journey. 6 months ago, he'd been just a man trying to protect his daughter from humiliation. Now, he stood as the founder of a movement that had reshaped policies, inspired laws, and, most importantly, softened hearts. A soft knock came at the door. Maya peeked in, dressed in a pale blue gown that shimmered under the soft light. "You're on in 2 minutes," she said with a grin. Elijah smiled. "You look just like your mother tonight." She walked closer, taking his hand. "Then you know she's proud of you." He nodded, emotion flickering across his usually steady face. "Let's make her prouder." The lights dimmed as they stepped onto the stage together. The audience rose in a standing ovation before Elijah said a single word. When the applause finally faded, he began not as a politician or executive, but as a father and human being. "I've been asked many times what I learned from all this," he said, "and my answer is simple, that power means nothing without purpose, and purpose means nothing without compassion." He paused, glancing at Maya before continuing. "The Angela Initiative isn't about me, or even about what happened to us. It's about turning pain into progress, about taking every closed gate and turning it into a door for someone else." The room was silent except for the sound of camera shutters clicking softly. "I named this foundation after my late wife. Angela," Elijah continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "She believed education was the purest form of equality. Tonight, we honor that belief by funding new programs in underrepresented communities, supporting young women of color entering STEM fields, and helping companies build cultures that value humanity over hierarchy." The crowd erupted in applause again, but among the clapping hands, there were tearful smiles, real ones, not the polished kind. In the front row sat Clara Nguyen, who had traveled from Dallas to be there. She smiled proudly, remembering the day she'd written the email that started it all. Next to her was Richard Blake, his posture humble, his eyes glistening. He had donated his entire severance package to the foundation, hoping to right some of what he'd helped break. At a nearby table, Samantha Hayes scribbled notes for her upcoming feature story. Her title was already chosen. From Scandal to Sanctuary, the night justice found its heart. When the speeches ended, music filled the hall, soft jazz blending with laughter, conversation, and the quiet sound of healing. Elijah moved through the crowd, greeting guests, shaking hands. But what moved him most weren't the powerful names or wealthy donors, it was the quiet ones. A young woman in a simple black dress approached him hesitantly. "Dr. Carter," she said, "I'm a student at Howard. I watched your testimony in class. Because of you, I applied for an internship I thought I wasn't qualified for, and I got it." Elijah smiled warmly. "You were qualified long before you believed it. Nearby." Maya laughed with a group of students from the new scholarship program. Her joy was effortless, her energy bright. For the first time in months, Elijah allowed himself to simply feel peace. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave, Harold Whitmore found him by the window overlooking the city. The older man looked smaller now, stripped of power but fuller in humility. "You did it," Harold said quietly. "You made the world listen." Elijah shook his head. "No, Harold, the world was always listening. It just needed the right kind of silence to hear." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "I'm helping fund community centers through the foundation," he said. "It's not penance, it's purpose." Elijah smiled. "That's how redemption begins." As the night drew to a close, the crowd dwindled, leaving only a few close friends and family. The band played its last song, and the soft glow of the chandeliers dimmed. Maya joined her father once more, handing him a glass of sparkling water. "You know, Dad," she said, "when all this started, I thought the world was against us. But now I see it differently." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She smiled. "It wasn't against us, it was just waiting for someone to show it how to be better." He laughed quietly, pride softening his eyes. "And you think I did that? I think we did," she said. They stood together, looking out through the tall glass windows at the city beyond, the same city that had once ignored, judged, and doubted them. Now, it gleamed like a promise kept. Suddenly, Samantha Hayes approached, her recorder in hand. "One last question. Dr. Carter," she said with a gentle smile, "after everything you've accomplished, what do you hope people remember you for?" Elijah thought for a moment, then answered softly, "Not for the fight, but for the faith. Because change isn't about anger, it's about belief. And belief, when shared, becomes unstoppable." The journalist lowered her recorder, her eyes shimmering. "That's going in the headline." Outside, snow began to fall soft, deliberate flakes settling on the city like blessings. Elijah turned to Maya. "Do you remember that night at the airport gate?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I remember everything." He smiled. "So do I. But now, when I think about it, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Because that moment taught me something no success ever could, that dignity isn't given. It's lived." Maya leaned her head against his arm. "Mom would have loved this. I think she's here," he said softly, looking up at the drifting snow, maybe not in sight, but in spirit. "Every act of kindness tonight, that's her." They stood in silence for a while, the city stretching endlessly before them. Then Elijah whispered, "The gates are open now, Maya, and they'll stay that way." And as the last notes of music faded, the father and daughter stepped out into the night, hand in hand, walking forward into a world they had helped make gentler, wiser, and infinitely more just. The story of Dr. Elijah Carter and his daughters reminds us that true justice begins not in courtrooms or headlines, but in how we choose to treat one another when no one is watching. It shows that silence can be as harmful as prejudice, and that real strength isn't loud, it's steady, patient, and principled. For older generations, this message carries even more weight. Many have seen the world change, but not always heal. Elijah's journey teaches that healing requires humility, that redemption is possible only when we face our failures with open eyes and open hearts. Equality isn't a battle to win once. It's a responsibility to carry forward, every day, in every interaction. Because every time we treat someone with dignity, we write a small line in a larger story of humanity. Dr. Carter didn't fight for revenge. He fought for recognition. And in doing so, he reminded us all justice is not about punishment, but about restoring what was stolen: respect, belonging, and hope. Thank you for watching this powerful journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness still left in the world. Together, let's keep the conversation alive. Let's stand for dignity, speak for fairness, and believe just like Elijah Carter did that change is always possible when we refuse to give up on compassion. Subscribe now and be part of a community that chooses courage over silence.